The smell of stale popcorn and cheap disinfectant was the first thing that hit me every night at the old movie theater. My name's Ben, and at 23, I was pretty much living the dream, or at least the night shift version of it. I was the lone projectionist and cleaner for the late-night showings, usually just me and a handful of stragglers who preferred a quiet, empty cinema. It was a sweet gig, usually. Pop a movie in, sweep up some popcorn, lock up. Easy money. Until it wasn't. It was a Tuesday, the kind of night where the city outside felt like it was holding its breath. We had just one late showing, some indie psychological thriller no one had ever heard of. By 1 a.m., the credits rolled, and I watched the last two guys shuffle out. I started my routine, flicking on the house lights in Theater 3, grabbing my broom and dustpan. The place was always a mess after a showing, especially with people sneaking in their own snacks. I was working my way down an aisle, humming some random tune, when I heard a faint thump. It came from the back of the theater, near the emergency exit. I stopped, broom midair. My first thought was a rat. We definitely had those. But this thump sounded heavier. Too heavy for a rat. Maybe a stray piece of equipment falling from the projection booth above? I waited, listening. Nothing. Just the low whir of the ventilation system. I shrugged. Probably nothing. I kept sweeping, but my ears were tuned in now. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was a soft scraping sound, like something being dragged across the concrete floor of the back hallway. That definitely wasn't a rat. The back hallways were only used for deliveries and emergencies. They were supposed to be locked up tight. I walked to the back of Theater 3, pushing aside the heavy velvet curtain that separated the theater from the emergency exit and the narrow corridor behind it. The corridor was dark, lit only by a faint red glow from the exit sign. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding louder than I intended in the quiet hall. "Anyone back here?" Silence. Just the persistent hum of the theater's systems. I took out my phone and flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, showing nothing but empty wall and a couple of stacked empty soda crates. I walked down the short corridor to the emergency exit door. It looked secure, the bar intact. But as I swept the light across the concrete floor, I saw something. A faint, irregular scuff mark, like something had been dragged. It started near the exit door and seemed to lead around the corner, towards the main staff hallway. My stomach did a little flip. This was wrong. No one should be back here. I pushed the fear down. Probably just the delivery guys leaving something weird, or maybe the daytime cleaner shifted something. I tried to convince myself. I finished cleaning Theater 3 and moved on to Theater 2, which had been empty all night. As I was walking through the empty rows, something caught my eye. One of the seats, about halfway down, was pulled out of alignment. Not just slightly, but noticeably, like someone had roughly shoved it or stood on it, and on the armrest, a small dark stain. It looked like grease, or maybe dried blood. I crouched down, my flashlight beam focused on it. It was sticky. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't here when I checked the theater earlier, and no one had been in this theater all night. I touched it tentatively with my finger. It was thick, almost tar-like. Definitely not popcorn butter. A chill snaked up my spine. Okay, this was officially getting weird. I stood up quickly, wiping my finger on my jeans. I looked around the empty theater, the vast rows of seats stretching into the darkness. It suddenly felt less empty, more occupied. I decided to check the security cameras. We had a few old ones, mostly for show, but they covered the main lobby and the entrances. I practically jogged to the manager's office, my keys jangling loudly in the quiet hall. The office was small and cramped. I pulled up the old monitor, inputting the password. The grainy black and white footage flickered to life. I fast-forwarded through the early evening, past the sparse crowd for the last showing. And then, around 1:15 a.m., Just after the last customers left, I saw a flicker on the main lobby camera. A shadow, quick and indistinct, darting from the lobby towards the theater hallways. It was too fast, too blurry to make out details, but it was definitely something. It moved low to the ground, almost scuttling. Then, a few minutes later, another flicker. This time, it was closer to the entrance of Theater 3, where I had heard the first thump. The figure seemed to pause, then slip inside. My blood ran cold. Someone was in here, and they had been in Theater 3. The same theater where I'd just found that scuff mark and heard the noises. The same theater I had just been in. I zoomed in, trying to enhance the image, but it was useless. The old camera resolution was terrible. The figure moved with an unnatural jerkiness, more like an animal than a person. It was small, maybe hunching, or maybe it was a kid, but the way it moved, it wasn't right. I jumped as a loud clang echoed from somewhere deep within the theater complex. It sounded like metal hitting metal. It seemed to come from the projection booth level. My head snapped towards the door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. I wanted to run, just get out, but what if it was just some homeless guy who snuck in, or some kids messing around? I was the only one here. It was my responsibility, and if there was someone actually in the building, I had to report it, or even try to get them out. Taking a shaky breath, I grabbed the heavy metal flashlight from the desk. It felt solid in my hand, a small comfort. I crept out of the office, heading towards the stairs that led up to the projection booths. Every creak of the old building, every distant hum, sounded amplified, sinister. As I climbed the stairs, the air grew colder, like someone had left a door open. The clang hadn't repeated, but I could hear a faint, irregular scratching sound coming from the top of the stairs, from the projection booth hallway. The same scratching I'd heard earlier. I reached the top, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The hallway was narrow, lined with doors to the individual projection booths. The scratching seemed to be coming from Theater 1's booth, the one furthest down. I walked slowly, each step feeling like an eternity. The scratching stopped as I approached the door to Theater 1's booth. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. Nothing, just an eerie silence. I slowly turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. I pushed it open just a crack, peering inside. The booth was dark, the projector bulb off. The only light was the faint glow of the city filtering through the tiny window that looked down into the empty theater. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Is anyone here?" No answer. I pushed the door open wider and stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight around the small room. Projectors, film reels, a dusty old chair. Everything seemed normal. But then, as my beam hit the far wall, I saw something chilling. Scratched into the old paint, roughly at eye level, was a series of crude, childlike drawings. Stick figures, some with distorted, wide smiles, and what looked like distorted faces. And underneath them, scratched deep into the wall, a single word: watching. My blood ran cold. These weren't here yesterday, and they weren't done with a marker. They were carved, gouged into the wall. My gaze fell to the floor near the scratched word. And there, glinting in my flashlight beam, was a small, broken piece of a ceramic shard, sharp and jagged, with a faint, reddish-brown smear on it. I dropped my flashlight. It clattered to the floor, rolling into a dark corner, leaving me in near total darkness, illuminated only by the faint red glow from the emergency exit sign at the end of the hall. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. Someone had been in here. Someone had scratched those words, those terrifying drawings. And they were still in here. A soft giggle echoed from the main theater downstairs. It was the same chilling, childlike giggle I'd heard earlier. It seemed to float up through the floor, wrapping around me. And then, from the hallway right outside the projection booth, I heard the rhythmic tapping again, slow and deliberate. It was coming from the doorway. My eyes darted to the narrow crack where the door met the frame. I could see a sliver of darkness, nothing more. Then, a faint shadow passed over the crack. Something was standing there, just outside. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to move. I stumbled backward, away from the door, my eyes fixed on that sliver of darkness. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. Suddenly, a loud, scraping shriek echoed from below, from the main floor of Theater 1. It sounded like metal being dragged across concrete. It was close, too close, and then the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself towards the emergency exit at the end of the projection booth hallway. I fumbled with the bar, my hands slick with sweat. It swung open with a loud groan, revealing the empty alley outside. I burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. I didn't look back. I didn't care about my job or the theater or what kind of monster might be inside. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until I couldn't feel my legs, until I was miles away from that place. I never went back to the theater. I called my manager from a payphone, told him I wasn't coming in, and hung up before he could ask questions. I later heard the theater shut down a few weeks after I left. They said it was economic reasons. I knew better. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still see those scratched drawings in my mind. Those distorted smiles, those empty eyes. And I remember that one word gouged into the wall. Watching. And I know deep down that whatever was in that theater, it wasn't just watching the movies. It was watching me. The flickering neon sign of the old gas station cast a sickly green glow over the empty highway. My shift had just started 11 p.m., and I was the only one working the graveyard. My name's Chris, and at 24, I was supposed to be finishing up my engineering degree, not selling lottery tickets and lukewarm coffee to truckers. But tuition wasn't cheap, and the overnight gig at Dave's Pit Stop was surprisingly quiet. Most nights, anyway. This particular night started out like any other. I was wiping down the counter, the smell of stale gasoline and cheap air freshener clinging to everything. The only sound was the distant hum of the refrigerators and the occasional gust of wind rattling the single pane of glass in the front door. We were way out on the edge of town, surrounded by nothing but fields and that long stretch of blacktop. Around 1:30 a.m., a set of headlights cut through the darkness. A beat-up, dark blue pickup truck pulled up to pump number 3. I watched through the grime-streaked window as a guy got out. He was big, maybe mid-40s, with a thick beard and a worn baseball cap pulled low. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. He filled his tank, then lumbered towards the door. He came in, his heavy work boots thudding on the linoleum floor. The bell above the door gave a weak jingle. He didn't say anything, just walked straight to the coffee machine, poured himself a cup, and then headed for the snack aisle. I kept my eyes on him, something about his silence putting me on edge. Most truckers, even the tired ones, would at least grunt a greeting. He picked up a bag of beef jerky, then another, and another. He ended up with about 5 bags, along with a couple of candy bars and a bottle of water. He brought them to the counter, setting them down with a soft thud. I rang him up, the beeps of the scanner echoing loudly in the quiet store. "That'll be $38.75, I said, my voice sounding a little too cheerful in the silence. He just stared at me. His eyes, partially hidden by the cap, seemed dark and unblinking. He didn't move. "Sir?" I tried again, a knot forming in my stomach. $38.75. Slowly, his hand went into his pocket. He pulled out a wad of crumpled bills. He counted out the exact amount, placing it on the counter. His fingers brushed mine briefly as I took the money, and they felt cold, almost clammy. He didn't look at me again. He picked up his bags and walked out, the door jingling his exit. I watched him get back into his truck and drive off, the red taillights disappearing into the vast emptiness of the highway. I exhaled, not realizing I had been holding my breath. Just a weird guy, I told myself. It's late. People are strange. I went back to restocking the cooler, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. It wasn't long, maybe 20 minutes, when I saw headlights again. My stomach tightened. It was the same pickup truck. It pulled up to pump number 3 again. My first thought was that he forgot something, but he just sat there. The engine was off, but the headlights were still on, blazing into the storefront. I couldn't see him clearly through the glare, but I knew he was just sitting there, facing the station. I felt a prickle of unease. Why wasn't he getting out? Why was he just sitting there, staring? This wasn't normal. I stood behind the counter, trying to look busy, but my eyes kept darting to the truck. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. He didn't move. He didn't turn off his lights. He just sat there, bathing the front of my gas station in blinding white. My phone was in my back pocket. I thought about calling my manager, or even the non-emergency line for the local sheriff, but what would I say? There's a guy sitting in his truck at my pump. It sounded paranoid. I forced myself to walk to the front window, pretending to adjust the display. I peered out, trying to get a better look. Still just the truck, unmoving. Was he asleep? But why with the lights on, aimed right at me? Then, slowly, deliberately, the driver's side window of the truck rolled down. I couldn't see his face because of the glare, but I saw his arm move, reaching out. And then, he just let his arm hang there, perfectly still, outside the window. His fingers were splayed, unmoving. That's when I felt a cold dread creep over me. This wasn't some guy who fell asleep. This was a display. He was showing me he was there, watching me. I backed away from the window, my heart starting to pound. I ducked behind the counter, trying to stay out of the direct line of the headlights. I could still see the truck's reflection in the shiny surface of the coffee machine. It was still there, the arm still dangling. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and scrolled to my manager's number. As I hovered over the call button, the phone vibrated. An incoming call. Unknown number. I stared at the screen. My stomach clenched. I didn't recognize the number. No one ever called the gas station directly. We had a business line, but it rarely rang unless it was corporate. The phone kept ringing. I didn't answer. I just stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. This had to be him. How did he get my number? Was it from the register? Our system wasn't supposed to show employee numbers. The ringing stopped. A few seconds later, it rang again. Same unknown number. I still didn't answer. This was a game, and I didn't want to play. After the second call went to voicemail, my phone buzzed with a new text message. From the same unknown number. I opened it, my thumb trembling. It was just one word. Waiting. My blood ran cold. He knew I was in here. He was messing with me. He wanted me to know. I dropped my phone on the counter. I looked around the gas station. All glass. Nowhere to hide. I was a fish in a bowl. Suddenly, the truck's engine roared to life. The headlights flickered, then dimmed. Then they brightened, aimed directly at the gas station door. I flinched, shielding my eyes. The engine idled, a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the floor. Then, the driver's side door of the truck slowly opened. I couldn't see anything through the glare of the headlights, just a black void where he should be. My breath hitched. He was getting out. I scrambled backwards, bumping into a display of chips, sending bags scattering across the floor. I didn't care. My eyes were fixed on that open truck door. A figure emerged from behind the blinding lights. It was him, the big guy. He walked slowly, deliberately, towards the gas station door. He didn't run, didn't seem to be in a hurry. Just a slow, steady walk. He had his hands shoved into his pockets. I backed up until my back hit the wall of the back office. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. I grabbed the metal baseball bat we kept under the counter for emergencies. It felt ridiculously light in my trembling hands. He reached the front door. He didn't try the handle. He just stopped, right in front of the glass, and stared in at me. Even with the harsh light behind him, I could make out his silhouette. He stood there, unmoving, just looking. Then, he slowly raised his right hand. He didn't make a fist. His fingers were splayed, just like when his arm was hanging out the window. And then, with his bare hand, he slowly pressed his palm flat against the glass of the door. He didn't move it. He just kept it there, pressed against the glass, and continued to stare. It felt like he was pressing his hand against my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, clutching the bat, staring at his hand on the glass, and the dark, unblinking eyes that seemed to bore into my soul through the reflection. He stayed like that for what felt like an eternity. Then very slowly, he turned his hand. He dragged his palm down the glass, creating a long, smudged streak, just like a child might do. It felt like a sick, twisted game. Then, he removed his hand. He took a single step back from the door. And then, with that same slow, deliberate movement, he simply turned around and walked back to his truck. He got in, closed the door, and without a single glance back, he put the truck in gear and drove away. The taillights faded into the distance. The hum of the refrigerators was the only sound again. I stood there, leaning against the office wall, the bat still clutched in my hand, my body shaking uncontrollably. I looked at the front door. There it was, the long, smudged streak on the glass, a clear, undeniable mark of his presence. I didn't finish my shift. I locked the doors, flipped the closed sign, and sat in my car shaking until the sun came up. I called my manager, told him I wasn't coming back, and didn't wait for his response. I still work nights sometimes, but never alone, and I never stop at gas stations out on deserted roads. Sometimes late at night I'll be driving, and I'll see a dark pickup truck ahead of me, or a set of headlights blazing too bright, and my heart starts to pound, because I know deep down that there are some people out there who just want to watch and wait. The fluorescent lights hummed, a low, constant buzz that was the only sound in the deserted supermarket. It was 2 a.m., and I was halfway through my shift, restocking shelves in the canned goods aisle. My name's Alex, and I'm 22. I took this night job at Fresh Mart a few months back to save up for a new car. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and most nights it was just me, the hum, and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Tonight felt different, though. Not in a big, dramatic way, but in that subtle, nagging way that makes the hairs on my arms stand up even when there's no breeze. It started around midnight. I was in the back, breaking down cardboard boxes, when I heard a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound. It wasn't coming from the usual places, like a mouse in the walls or the old freezer unit kicking on. This was different. It sounded like it was coming from the main store near the front. I paused, holding my breath, listening. Nothing. Just the hum. I figured it was just my imagination, or maybe a stray cat that had somehow gotten in. We had a problem with those sometimes. I shrugged it off and went back to work. A little while later, I was pushing a pallet jack down the main aisle, heading towards the dairy section. The store was huge, and with all the lights on, it usually felt bright, almost sterile. But tonight, the shadows seemed deeper, clinging to the corners of the aisles. As I passed the bakery, I noticed something. The glass display case, where they kept the fresh bread and pastries, had a small, smudged handprint on the inside. Now that was weird. The bakery was locked up tight after closing. No one was supposed to be in there. I stopped the pallet jack, my heart doing a little flutter against my ribs. I walked over, peering closer. It was definitely a handprint, small like a kid's, but smeared, as if someone had pressed their palm against the glass and then dragged it down. It was on the inside. I tried the door to the bakery. Locked. Solid. I even gave it a good tug. No give. How could a handprint be on the inside if no one was in there? I pulled out my phone, flicked on the flashlight, and shined it around the bakery. The counters were clean, the ovens off, everything exactly as it should be. No sign of anyone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the vast silence of the store. "Is anyone here?" I stood there for a minute, just staring at that smudged print. It felt wrong, like a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was there from yesterday, and the cleaning crew missed it, but it looked fresh, like it had just happened. And why would it be on the inside of a locked case? I shook my head, trying to clear the weird feeling. It was probably nothing, just a weird anomaly. I had work to do. I pushed the pallet jack towards dairy, but I kept glancing back at the bakery. That smudged print burned into my mind. As I was stocking milk, I heard it again. This time it was clearer. A soft, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like it was coming from the frozen foods aisle, just a few aisles over. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a mouse. This was too deliberate. I grabbed a heavy box of frozen pizzas, just in case, and slowly walked towards the sound. The tapping stopped as soon as I rounded the corner. The frozen foods aisle was long, lined with tall, white freezers. The cold air hit me, making me shiver. I scanned the aisle, my eyes darting from one end to the other. Nothing, just the low hum of the freezers. "Okay, this isn't funny," I said, my voice a little louder this time, trying to sound confident. "Who's there?" Silence. I walked down the aisle, checking behind each freezer door, even though I knew no one could hide there. It was all just rows of frozen dinners and ice cream. When I got to the end, I turned around, just to realize that on the glass door of the ice cream freezer, right at my eye level, was another handprint. This one wasn't smeared. It was a clear, distinct print of a small hand, fingers spread wide, pressed against the glass. And it was on the inside. My breath hitched. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a cleaning oversight. Someone or something was in here, and it was messing with me. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. There was no way a kid could be in the store. The doors were locked, the alarms set. Only employees with key cards could get in, and I was the only one on shift. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on that handprint. It felt like it was watching me. I could almost feel the cold of the glass through the print. I turned and practically ran back to the main aisle, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed to call my supervisor. This was beyond my pay grade. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen. As I was about to dial, the lights flickered. Not just a quick blink, but a slow, drawn-out dimming, then brightening, then dimming again. The hum of the lights changed, becoming a low, guttural growl. I froze, my thumb hovering over the call button. The store was plunged into a strange, murky twilight. The shadows stretched and danced, making familiar shelves look like monstrous shapes. I could barely see the end of the aisle. Then, from somewhere deep within the store, I heard a faint, almost childlike giggle. It was soft, barely audible, but it cut through the growling hum of the lights like a knife. It wasn't a happy giggle. It was chilling, like something I'd hear in a nightmare. My blood ran cold. I dropped my phone. It clattered on the linoleum floor, the screen cracking. I didn't care. All I could think about was that giggle. It was close. Too close. I scrambled to pick up my phone, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it again. I had to get out. I had to. As I straightened up, my eyes darted towards the end of the aisle, where the main entrance was. Standing by the automatic sliding doors, just inside the entrance, was a figure. It was small, no taller than a 10-year-old, silhouetted against the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I couldn't make out any details, just the outline of a small person. It was perfectly still, just standing there, facing me. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't moving. It was just watching. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at this small, silent figure at the front of the store. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, they brightened, illuminating the figure. It wasn't a kid. Not really. The proportions were off. The head seemed too large for the body, and the limbs were too long, too thin. And its face, even from this distance, in that brief flash of light, I could tell it wasn't right. It was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, they were just dark, empty holes. And it was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across its face. The lights dimmed again, plunging the figure back into shadow. But the image was seared into my mind. That smile, those eyes. I finally found my voice, a choked gasp. I turned and ran. I didn't care where, just away from that thing. I ran past the dairy, past the bakery, not even looking at the handprints anymore. I just ran, my feet pounding on the linoleum, the growling hum of the lights and that chilling giggle echoing in my ears. I burst through the double doors leading to the back stockroom, slamming them shut behind me. I leaned against them, panting, my chest heaving. The stockroom was dark, only lit by the emergency lights, but it felt safer, more real. I fumbled for the light switch, my hands still trembling. The overhead lights flickered on, bathing the room in a harsh, yellow glow. I looked around, my eyes wide, searching for anything out of place. Nothing, just stacks of boxes and shelves. I pulled out my phone again, the cracked screen a stark reminder of what had just happened. I had to call someone, anyone. As I raised the phone to my ear, I heard a faint, rhythmic tapping again. It was coming from the other side of the stockroom, from behind the stacks of boxes. My blood ran cold again. It was in here. It had followed me. I dropped the phone again. This time it shattered completely. I didn't even register the loss. All I could hear was that tapping, getting closer. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the boxes. I could see the shadows shifting behind them, moving. It was coming for me. I stumbled over a loose pallet, falling backward onto the concrete floor. I scrambled to get up, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. The tapping was right there now, just on the other side of the boxes. Then a small, pale hand reached out from between two stacks of boxes. Its fingers were long and thin, almost skeletal. It tapped twice on the cardboard. I screamed, a raw, guttural scream that tore from my throat. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the emergency exit. I didn't care about the alarm. I didn't care about anything but getting out. I burst through the exit door, the night air hitting my face like a shock. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the street, gasping for breath, my legs burning. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I never went back to that supermarket. I called my supervisor from a payphone down the street, told him I quit, and didn't offer any explanation. He sounded annoyed, but I didn't care. I just wanted to forget. But I can't. Every night, when the world goes quiet, I hear it. That low, constant hum. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear a faint, chilling giggle. And I see that smile, that wide, unnatural grin. And I know deep down that it's still there, waiting, in the quiet, empty aisles of the Nightshift.